Welcome to the Daily Exchange. We're here actually coming in from IBM Think 2019. Guys, we have got an expert panel today, and we're talking about the future of quantum and blockchains, as well as cryptocurrency. Jesse Lund here, the VP of Blockchain and Digital Currencies, also including IBM World Wire, which is a global remittance platform. Welcome, Jesse. Thank you. We've got, to my right here, Michael Osborne, who is a security researcher and manager at the IBM Research Lab in Zurich. Michael published a point of view paper about the threats of quantum computers with blockchain. Welcome, Michael, to the Daily Exchange. I'll give you guys a shake. I left one off for you there, Jesse. Sorry. And Nev Zunic, who is an IBM Distinguished Engineer, CTO, Global Data Security Leader, and IBM Master Inventor with 60 patents under his belt. Nev currently works and focuses on assessing quantum risks and opportunities. Welcome to the show. Thank you. Guys, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction here, which is really important because we're talking about the risk of quantum computers on actual blockchains themselves. Now, quantum computers are quite revolutionary. And there is an actual 20-qubit computer on display here at the Think 2019, guys. It's an incredible piece of machinery. It's actually very small, which was quite interesting in and of itself, compared to the amount of cooling that is required. Now, a lot of blockchains, including Bitcoin, use public key cryptography, and that's really important. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Basically, keeping your private key, your actual key, keeping that secure. Now, quantum computers potentially can pose a risk to that, and we're going to talk about the actual threat involved, but there's a number of different ways that can be attacked as well. Now, I just want to get into first, because it's really, really important. If I can start, Michael, with yourself, what is a quantum computer? Because, and how does it differ to a legacy computer?
So, it's a very good question, and it's actually quite difficult to explain sometimes. But essentially, a quantum computer is a computer that uses quantum mechanical principles rather than binary zeros and ones like as classical computers do. The interesting thing about them is that if you want to double the power of a classical computer, you double the number of bits, essentially, you double the number of gates. With a quantum computer, you double the power essentially by adding one more qubit. So a 16-qubit quantum computer is essentially double the power of a 15-qubit quantum computer. And essentially they're based as a number of principles which make them very interesting. One of them is called superposition. It's essentially a quantum bit, essentially a qubit. Can be in any one of a number of states. It doesn't have to be 0 or 1, it can be anything. There's a concept of entanglement, which means you can't, they somehow affect each other through these quantum properties, meaning that the combination of all these things essentially is where the power lies. And there's a third property, which is interference, essentially. So imagine that as like waves in an ocean. And all of these very special properties mean there's some really cool things that you can do. For many years, it was theoretical. The theory is not new, it's decades old. What's really interesting is the technology now is really starting to advance, and we're really starting to see some very interesting applications already for this special way of actually computing.
Okay, now let's talk about this. So we've got these new, I guess, really powerful computers, but they're not necessarily powerful in all different ways. They've got different abilities, but particularly let's focus on cryptography. Are quantum computers a threat to cryptography? I'll start with you, Nev, on this.
Yes. With the properties that Michael just described, the capability of a quantum computer is one that will allow us to tackle problems that we cannot solve with today's classical systems. So a prime example of that is factorization of large numbers. We can reverse engineer, or we can recover a private key from a public key once the quantum computers are built to sufficient scale.
So let's talk about that scale. Right now on show, we've got I believe a 20-qubit at the stand today. Now, what is the kind of scale? You've written a point of view, Michael, on this. What's the kind of point of scale that we would need to get to in order to crack, say, Bitcoin?
So the first thing to understand is that different cryptography requires different implementations. So, for example, RSA cryptography is less efficient to implement on a quantum computer than elliptic curve cryptography. So anywhere where you use elliptic curve cryptography, actually the threat is a little bit closer than actually using some of these older schemes. And it also depends on the key size. So it's very dependent on the crypto that's used and the key size that's used. If you look at blockchain, actually most for performance and size reasons, people use elliptic curve-based cryptographies. So essentially, the sort of crypto which you actually need a slightly smaller machine in order to implement the attacks which we're talking about. So for the type of crypto that is used, for example, in Bitcoin, you need in the order of 1,300 logical qubits.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a sec. So I know this is very technical. And Jesse, I'm not talking about the market impact on this in a sec, but I think this is really important. We're at 20. We need to get to 1,300. And I think, Nev, you said before, we talked about on the panel today, we might need to get to 1 million. So it's 1,300 logical qubits, but to support that, you need 1 million qubits. Can we just talk a little bit about that and supporting that?
So the main problem with the technology, the main challenge is that these are very, very small nuclear forces that we're dealing with. So the more qubits you add, the more error that you're going to have to deal with in order to have algorithms which kind of work. And the way to do that is that for each logical qubit, you need a number of physical qubits for error correction. And the amount of physical qubits that are required is really, this is the thing that we don't know how they will evolve. So currently we estimate we need quite a few, hence the number of 1 million or so. But we can't predict how well this error correction will improve, how well the stability of the qubits will improve. So these are things that are very hard to project, essentially. So we know a kind of the worst case. We don't know the best case for the technology advancement.
Nev, did you want to add to that as well?
Yes. In this morning's panel, many of the audience members were asking how many qubits will be required to crack elliptic curve crypto, and when will that happen? And so the answer was on the order of 1,000 logical qubits and 1 million plus physical qubits. And the time frame is at least a decade away, in our opinion, because of all the engineering challenges that need to be overcome. We have a 20-qubit system on display at the exhibit hall, but and that's only 20 qubits, but to get to 1 million within that confined space will require innovation, quite a bit of innovation in engineering solutions that we currently don't have.
That's good news. So I was going to get on my phone and sell all my Bitcoin.
Don't sell your Bitcoin yet. It's okay. Okay, but there are some other threats, and we're going to get into those as well. But I just want to talk about, do you think, Jesse, in terms of the market, like just high level, where's the market at in terms of its view of this? And do you think this is stuff that's sort of priced in?
I don't think it's factored in at all to the engineering efforts. I mean, you're seeing some crypto ledgers that are quantum resistant. I think there's even a quantum resistant ledger technology that's out there in the market in the open source space now. But I think it's it's way off in the distance. I think what the crypto community is trying to do right now is to build scale into their products, their solutions, so that it can actually support the type of transaction volume that we see in conventional financial systems today. So I think it's way off in the future in their mind, but it may be further off than 10 years, and that estimate alone may bring it more to the forefront.
Okay, let's do it. So just very specifically, let's get to the threat. Nev, are cryptocurrencies under threat potentially of quantum computers?
Yes, and that's about 1 to 2 decades away. So those are, plus other products are also threatened by quantum. Think of any product that has a long life cycle. There's a design and development cycle plus a product life cycle, and that could range up to about 30 years or so. So companies need to be aware of quantum and the potential risk that it will bring, so that they can take actions today to protect their products so they're not hackable at some point during the life cycle of their products.
Okay, let's talk about the threat and really get a little bit into it. So how would a quantum computer attack, I guess, a blockchain? What's sort of one possibility?
Well, I would say there's probably 2 primary possibilities, and it's easiest to think about it in the context of Bitcoin, I think. So one is an attack on the network itself, right? And the big concern with Bitcoin is this notion of a 51% attack. The idea is that Bitcoin implements this blockchain, and once these blocks are written, they're immutable, they can't be changed, and that's an assumption that the rest of the whole thing is built upon. But if you had enough computing power, you could effectively go and rewrite history, if you will. You could go back and compute all of the the checksums, all of the hashes of all the prior blocks. And the theory is that you could capture 51% of the computing power of the Bitcoin network. You could go do that. You could rewrite history and effectively change balances, right? And move funds around between the different accounts. So that's one big threat that people are already concerned about conceptually. But I think, again, the assumption is there's not a computing power that exists in the world to be able to do that. So we'll worry about that later, I think is what the community is thinking. The other threat is just kind of a brute force attack on individual accounts. It's reverse engineering the private keys, which represent, the control of your wallet, right? The public key is essentially your wallet that holds balances. I think that's a real credible threat where, like Bitcoin is a public ledger. So you can go out and see which public keys are essentially holding the most balances, and you could target those with hundreds or thousands of Bitcoin in there and say, I'm going to expend effort, computing resource to go try and reverse engineer that private key from the public key, which is exposed. And so I think that's probably even a nearer term threat.
Okay, we're going to get to talking a little bit about, we're going to talk a little bit about the other cryptographies that are out there right now, and the second, other ways that could be attacked. I just want to ask, because I think it's really important. Do you think, Michael, do you think, is a quantum computer advantage potentially the next Y2K?
Yes, essentially. With the new quantum era that we're just entering, it's put a shelf life on the crypto that we use today. So when we design crypto systems, they need to be strong enough to last a number of time. Typically, we aim for 30 years. We don't have 30 years anymore, essentially. The risk is simply too high. The advances in quantum computing will break things before that. So it's a real challenge, and something that it's an ongoing thing. So with any cryptography, essentially, people are always trying to break it, and so we need to keep a little bit ahead of the curve, and it really has a shelf life. So we really need to be transitioning to these schemes, either making sure that we can transition using crypto agility, which I think we'll discuss later, or making sure they use crypto techniques today that we're confident are safe against what we call quantum adversaries. Okay.
Now, recently there's been a botnet's been hired. It's cracked a 768 length key. I believe that's 768. I'm just going to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's right. So that took a couple of months. There is some actual work being done right now on new cryptographies. Can you tell us about what's being done right now by companies? Obviously with your work with IBM as well. With these new cryptographies.
So there's a lot of effort and research taking place developing new cryptographic schemes that will be resistant to any potential attacks by quantum systems, called quantum-resistant algorithms. There are many submissions that have been made to standards bodies around the world for consideration for adoption as new standards. And all of these new schemes are viewed as being resistant to any potential attacks by quantum, based on their mathematical properties. For example, in the US, we have the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, standards body. There were 82 submissions for candidate algorithms to NIST, 69 of which were accepted. And now there's a cryptanalysis effort taking place where the security and strength of these algorithms are being reviewed, and 69 were accepted. 26 made it to the second round, and that was just published in January. And from these 26, there will be a few selected for adoption as a standard. And these are all deemed to be quantum resistant.
Okay. Now, from a company perspective, when are companies sort of looking at this as being a serious threat versus today? When's the timeline right now?
So organizations need to understand what type of information assets they have and how long you need to protect those assets. And what is the life cycle of those sensitive secrets? It could be trade secrets, it could be intellectual property. They have to protect this for a certain length of time. Depending on that length of time, they have to make an educated guess as to when quantum computers will be of sufficient size to attack the protection mechanisms that are in place in order to decrypt those valuable assets. Another consideration is that any communications taking place, say, that are encrypted, could be intercepted today and stored for decryption at a later time. So if there are sensitive transmissions between government bodies or between organizations or for M&A activity, financial transactions, that could be intercepted and stored and decrypted in the future. Okay. So organizations need to be aware of this today and start taking action today to future-proof themselves against any potential quantum attacks. Okay.
Now, Jesse, you're quite involved with the Stellar blockchain as well. Are there discussions right now with Stellar or other cryptocurrencies that you know of, and this quantum threat, which we've been talking about?
I would say, with respect to the quantum threat itself, there's awareness, but I think remediation of that threat is pretty far out on the roadmap. With exception of the general architecture, both with Stellar and with Hyperledger Fabric that we have a lot of involvement in as well, the architectures are designed to make the consensus algorithms pluggable and unpluggable, right? And kind of embedded in those consensus algorithms are the encryption and the cryptography that supports that. And so, to the extent that these networks, these protocols are being designed so that you can easily unplug and plug in new consensus algorithms, then yes, I think they're future-proof. Mm-hmm. But in terms of developing or adopting these new algorithms that have yet to be standardized, I'd say there's very little work.
Okay, and let's talk about that. I just want to get very specific for a sec in terms of, say, Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin moves quite slowly, you would say, Michael. We talked about this as well before. And its development life cycle, and Nev, you pointed out some of these threats could potentially be today and reverse engineered and things like that. So given the slow movement, is Bitcoin in trouble?
Well, the short term, I would say no, but Bitcoin is really just one of many, and I think Bitcoin was the prototype, that launched a whole other set of initiatives. I think Bitcoin is here for a long time. I think it will adapt. Its community will recognize this as I don't want to call it a threat, but I think a remediation item that needs to be looked at with intensity. And I like the analogy to the Y2K threat because while that turned out to be kind of a non-event, the world didn't end at midnight in 2000. It did spark a lot of preparation and a lot of serious preparation by technology leaders all over the world. And I think that's the type of awareness that this really should be instilling in senior technology executives at big companies, because the threat to crypto is one thing. But when we say crypto here, I think we mean not just cryptocurrencies, we mean the crypto technologies that protect the perimeters of banks and government entities and all sorts of things that are much more valuable than the current market cap of all the cryptocurrencies added together.
Right.
Now, yeah, can I add something there?
Yeah, go
for it. So the interesting thing about blockchains is that you need the participation of everybody involved in that participation to move. So that can be a daunting task. Yep. So, for example, Satoshi's original coins, which are still valued at some billions, right. If they remain in that state essentially until a quantum machine is available, then in theory somebody could just figure out what the private key was and move those off. So any system where it's complicated to move because you need the participation of everybody, right. Those are the things you're starting to think about early. You can't wait until there's a threat and then figure out how to migrate. Those are things you need to plan well in advance.
Okay. Let's talk about that because, I think there's definitely potential future services. I think that we talked about this on the panel about what we call crypto cracking as a service, maybe. Or the nice way of putting it is key recovery. Okay. Now, we've got this recent news with the Canadian exchange losing about 26,000 Bitcoin, or I think it was 160 million. It's unsure about exactly how much, but there's a lot of Bitcoin. Now, do you think that there will be services in the future, hired mercenaries to go and hunt down and crack keys?
That's a very interesting business proposal. I can envision key recovery services of that nature because organizations will lose keys. It could be due to malicious activity, disgruntled employee. They could destroy the key stores. So there will be a need for some type of key recovery capability.
Much in the same way as we actually need to recover passwords when people forget them to get back to the data that they're protecting. So,
and these already exist, right?
yes, they already exist as services.
I think the outcome, the outplay of that particular incident will be interesting to follow, because $150 million is ample incentive on the heels of this 768-bit botnet that was able to crack this in a month. 150 or whatever million dollars is incentive to expend some amount of money in computing power to try and recover those keys, I think. And I don't know if it's one key or if it's 100 keys, but if it's one key or two keys that's that really holds these 26,000 Bitcoin, then it's definitely worth a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if people are working on it already.
Right. Now let's go back. So let's talk about wider implications of quantum with cryptography. Michael, are other crypto, services under threat potentially from a quantum computer?
Yes, most definitely. So I think there are a couple of key risk categories. One are systems that are not designed to be updatable, that have a long shelf life. I think Nev already alluded to this. The other one is essentially data that has to be around a long time. So if I look at the systems, there are critical mainframe systems, for example, that are 50 years old, essentially. I think most of the people have retired who maybe programmed them. So actually the ability to update these sorts of systems is really critical. It's the same for cars, for example. A car generally takes 7 years to design, something that's going to be in the field for 25 years. Cars today are very connected. They use cryptography everywhere as kind of roots of trust. Essentially, one needs to be very cognizant and aware today of how one designs these systems, how one makes them updatable, in order not to be in the position in 10, 15, 20 years' time that essentially these things are impossible to upgrade and they need to essentially, and it causes a massive problem. That's why really it's a challenge today. Being cognizant of the problem, that when you design things, they need to be fit for the next, for whatever the shelf life is for those things, and what that means then for making them safe in the future.
So we talked a little bit about, so that would potentially mean that some other cryptographies that protect things like email could be under threat. And so that might mean that maybe there's other ways to sort of, get people's private keys, maybe it's through email. I'm sure there are other services, but can you talk a little bit about to that, Nev, just explaining, does this give other opportunities for hackers to, secretly get a quantum computer and then have that running, and then maybe, attack people's, like you were saying, Jesse, the main wallets or big pools of crypto?
The initial attacks will be very targeted. They'll go after specific private keys. They won't go after a whole bunch of keys because it's too computer intensive. They'll have to run time on quantum computers because most of them will be offered through the cloud like we're doing now. So they'll have to run some time to try and run the algorithms to retrieve the private keys. But as Michael was alluding to, there are many data protection mechanisms out there today. And wherever we have data protection in place, some form of cryptography is being used. This cryptography needs to be updated over time. And we're sort of getting at crypto agility. And this is the ability of organizations to quickly change the underlying crypto functions to move to quantum safe crypto functions so that they're protected in the future. And their ability to do this very quickly and efficiently is what we refer to as crypto agility.
Now, crypto agility. So, Jesse, you want to add to that?
Well, I was going to add, in a former life as the head of architecture for Wells Fargo and their technology group, I just remember, when you speak of crypto agility, the move from SHA-1 to SHA-2 and all of the certificates that protect really the entry point of internet banking that was a painful move. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of.
How long did that approximately take?
I would say probably from the time where we said, hey, we need to do this, where the CIO said that we're going to do this, to the time where they were all done, was probably a 2-year process, and that's not fast enough. I mean, and so I think we need to get to your point. That we need to get to a point where we can, do that faster.
And there are studies out there that show that after 10 years, SHA-1 will still be used by 20% of organizations.
Right.
Wow.
10 years after the fact.
Let's talk about the market impact quickly as well, Jesse. How many blockchains or cryptos out there do you think are susceptible to quantum computers? Just say we had one today. We had the old 1 million qubits spinning up in the warehouse here. What's the market impact?
I think it would be significant. I think if there's 1,500 cryptocurrencies in the world today, I think many of them are either derivatives from Bitcoin Core or they're built on top of Ethereum. I think both of which are susceptible today in their current forms. Now, Ethereum's going through some significant work to swap out their consensus algorithm. They're doing that, again, for scalability reasons, I think, more so than anything. But I think that'll be a proof point for everything built on Ethereum as to whether or not they can adapt and go again when we want to insert quantum resistant algorithms at some point. But I would say probably more than half out there are susceptible today. I think that'd be a conservative number.
Okay, 50% of the market. That's quite significant. Let's talk about, I guess, companies and what they're doing. I know you're working with a number of different companies now. Can you just sort of, what's the dialogue? What's the read on the market in terms of quantum, I guess, resistance and quantum agility, and where's the hot topic right now?
Actually, both of those. The main discussion we're having with clients is, with some leading-edge clients, they're well aware of all the activity taking place with quantum and all of the standards activities, and they understand they need to transition to new quantum-safe schemes. So they're keeping abreast of all the latest developments, and they are taking actions to be prepared to make that switch and transition to the crypto-safe schemes once they're selected for standards adoption. And then we have other clients where we are educating them as to what the potential risks will be, and we're raising their level of awareness as to what could the potential impact be to their organization based on the type of information assets that they're protecting. So if they're protecting trade secrets, M&A information, financial transaction information, all of that could be at risk. And many organizations don't have people on board who are aware of the developments in quantum to understand the risks that will be there in the future.
Let's talk about timeline very specifically. Michael, you've written this point of view paper specifically on Hyperledger, I believe, or and I guess this extends potentially to other blockchains. But when will a quantum computer risk, do you think, in your view, be real?
I mean, risk is an interesting thing. So essentially, a lot of companies, if you have risk, the probability that something is happening, and the impact that happening has. So for many, many schemes, that impact is just off the scale. It doesn't matter how small that risk is. If they don't react and if they don't do something about it, then essentially it's a form of negligence. So that risk is there today, essentially. And so the first thing is awareness that's the case. And I think a lot of people are aware, maybe not in all industries. There's certainly those in the security savvy finance industries, for example, are, but there's a lot of manufacturing critical infrastructures they're not. So, I mean, there are a number of scenarios what in terms of a concrete timeline, how this will take, and it purely depends on how fast these machines evolve. It's a bit of an arms race right now. So essentially, many different nation states are investing very heavily in building up their quantum skills. For the good things, of course. I mean, it's the benefit for humanity is tremendous, and the promise. But nevertheless, there's a lot of money being invested. And actually predicting how fast or which direction technology we take is, it's difficult, if not impossible. So the path that impacts the timeline It's a really, really difficult question to answer. I mean, there are scenarios where it might never happen. There are scenarios, people are saying a certain probability inside of 7 years. You essentially get lots of suggestions for timeframes. The point is, there's a shelf life for crypto today. We have to transition to the new stuff. And we have to be doing it now just because it takes so long. I think that you alluded to it yourself. It's just very difficult because we are not crypto agile. It's very difficult to change crypto. So we know it's going to take a decade maybe to change. So we can't wait, a decade to see how things will evolve before we start doing something. Which is why, from the risk perspective, that risk is there today. And the interesting thing about it is you're not going to know it's happened. It's not like hacking in the sense which trails are left behind. It's if you can extract a private key from the public key, it's like a valid front door key. I mean, you're not going to know it's happened until it's too late, essentially. So you have to be prepared for that scenario.
Some impersonation attacks.
Yeah, I was going to say we used to deal with that in banking. I don't want to say all the time, but this imposter threat where through some other means this nefarious actor would gain legitimate access in an illegitimate way to real accounts. Right? So it wasn't a hack. And you wouldn't learn about the theft of money until it was done and gone.
Nev, in your view, for companies that you're working with, when do they see the threat being real from quantum computers?
Some of the leading edge companies see that threat as being real now because they want to take action today. So they're prepared to thwart anything that quantum will bring. So they are starting to create an inventory of all their crypto deployments to identify which specific crypto deployments will be at risk. And those are the ones that they will prioritize in terms of migrating to crypto-safe, quantum-safe schemes in the future. So,
let's talk about, I guess, the opportunities of the quantum computers a bit as well, because there's other opportunities, and I think they're talking about this a lot, I think, 2019 here as well. Where do you see, Nev, I guess, for quantum, where can those computers help? What could they create?
They will help with modeling chemical compounds, with drug formulations. They'll help with financial optimization models, artificial intelligence, and probably many more things that we haven't even thought about today. So there will be a huge benefit in those areas.
And I guess quantum computers for finance, Jesse, is that something you think as well that those companies are looking at?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think when you can do things faster, there's a benefit. I mean, a reduction in friction, right, and which is the real, I think, complaint against infrastructure today. Financial services infrastructure is this notion of friction, where it takes a lot of intermediaries to do things. And if you can reduce intermediaries, you reduce friction. Friction is really time and cost. So if you can reduce the time component, you effectively add value, whether it's to the user experience or just to the capabilities. Remember, there's still 2 billion adults in the world. Of the world's population, 2 billion adults who are unbanked, don't have access to financial services, and yet they're all carrying smartphones, or at least half of them are carrying smartphones in their pocket, and have the capacity to be involved in the global banking infrastructure in some way. So reducing friction by way of making computer systems go faster, making authorizations happen quicker, whatever it is, huge benefits.
Yeah. Now, Peter Shaw came up with an algorithm, to crack public key cryptography to some extent with a quantum computer. Let's talk about, what can companies do or algorithms or blockchains do to protect themselves today? What would be an example? Like, how could you fix it?
So I think there are a number of things one can do. So first is obviously awareness. Secondly is you can increase key sizes. So if you use larger keys, or you move from elliptic curve to RSA cryptography, so slightly older forms of cryptography, you can actually delay the point at which there will be a quantum threat. So they're temporary solutions. I think the best solution is essentially to start looking at these quantum-resistant algorithms. And these algorithms are interesting because some of them are actually perform better than the crypto we use today. So one of the big challenges in blockchains and cryptocurrencies, transaction throughput, which is in many systems gated by the cryptography underpinnings. And so if we can make that cryptography faster, at the same time as making it quantum safe, then that's, I think, a very good kind of a win-win for, especially public blockchains.
Exactly.
Okay. Really interesting, I guess. And I guess the reality is some of those things take a bit of time. Like if you want to just add a key or change the size, that's a big deal.
It is a big deal, and it's a problem because we don't have this agility. So what we kind of hope is people are aware. I mean, it's not just a problem with quantum. Quantum is one challenge to crypto. All of the other challenges, like bad implementations, side channels, and stuff like this, that cause us to be, from a cybersecurity perspective, very weak. People are looking for some vehicle to actually be able to do things better. And I think what's really nice about the quantum threat is that this is a kind of, could be a rallying call to actually take a step back, look at how we do crypto properly, and not just address the quantum threat, but all of the day-to-day threats that the bad crypto actually brings with it.
So, there's obviously proof of stake and there's proof of work. Does proof of stake help in terms of quantum resistance?
I think there are different threats. I think we've heard about the hashing type threats, the authentication type threats, and the retrospective decryption threats. It may help with one category of threats, but it certainly doesn't help with if you're encrypting sensitive information on side chains or on side DBs, and you haven't sorted out the authentication problem. Those problems still are very much a challenge, even with different consensus protocols.
Right. Let's wrap up, I guess, guys. In terms of for everyone watching, the sort of give everyone a chance for what's the one key takeaway if you're a blockchain or a company that people should know. If you want to start with that as well.
And organizations should become aware of the potential risk associated with quantum computers once they're built to sufficient scale. And they need to understand what sort of information assets they're currently protecting and how long they need to protect them from. Once they look at that life cycle for data protection, then they can make a determination as to by when they need to become quantum safe, and can start implementing solutions today to become quantum safe. They also need to start upskilling their employees and make them knowledgeable about quantum and how quantum will modify their existing processes and technologies and capabilities. That's what I would leave with them. So,
Jesse, if you want to.
Yeah, for me, I think it would be two things. And one is to pick up on the awareness and preparation that I think all of my colleagues here talked about. We need to be planning ahead for this. The threat is real. The threat is now. But I think there's a corollary to that. It's not just a threat. There's an opportunity, right? As Michael was just saying, these quantum-resistant algorithms actually provide a means to improve the scalability of some of these public blockchain networks who have been highly criticized because of that, because they lack scale. And I think that brings some benefit to the space overall, right? Where these public blockchain networks can actually scale to levels that meet or exceed the expectations of the current global financial infrastructure. And I think that's a really cool thing.
Mark, if you want to leave us with your, I know you're working on a lot of research on a lot of different things, and you can talk about a lot of different topics. So if you give us one killer thing, I guess with quantum and blockchain, what should we be doing? What should Bitcoin do to that?
I think I would use the quantum threat, and I think I mentioned it previously, as a rallying call. There's so many things that we do not do right or properly in how we design security, how we design crypto, and very often it's difficult to generate the motivation to do something about it. We do incremental steps, we kind of patch things here and there. It's really an opportunity. It's really because of the impact of not doing it. It's a rallying call, an opportunity to actually start doing cryptographic things properly.
Wonderful. Guys, thank you so much. There was incredible insight. The threat is real. Potentially, quantum computers could be the next Y2K. That is the Daily Exchange here from the IBM 2019 Think. We'll see you guys later.